Good morning and welcome to another AD Quickbite. And in this quick bite I'm going to talk about probably my favourite way to catch carp, and that's surface fishing. And my first tip is for the bait itself. Now my free offerings for surface fishing, although there's lots of ready-made floaters available, I tend to use the cheaper mixers and then I pimp them up myself. So what I'll do with those, I'll give them a generous glug of an oil-based liquid, and I've got a hemp oil here. So what that does, when you feed the free offerings, the hemp oil that you've put on the biscuits, it will create a nice flat spot so you can see the carp taking the free offerings and hopefully your hook bait amongst them, and it also adds some extra attraction to the bait as well. And the next thing I want to talk about is the setup itself. Now I highly recommend a balanced setup, and what I mean by a balanced setup is I've got a 2-pound test curve rod with a small reel loaded with a dedicated 12-pound surface fishing line. And the reason I use a 2-pound test curve rod is you'll get less hook pulls on those tiny hooks and you'll break less of those finer diameter hook links. And then on the end of that main line, I've got one of the bolt machines. I won't go into too much detail how to set it up because we have in fact filmed a separate quick bite showing you how to set that rig up. And then the hook link, it's still 12-pound break and strain, but it's a slightly thinner diameter. And on the end of the hook link, I've got a size 8 mixer hook down to a hair rig. And the next point I want to mention I feel is a very important point, and that is the hook bait itself. Now I know lots of you will probably put soft hookable pellets on, even some people will super glue a dog biscuit to the back of the hook. But the problem with doing that, once it's been in the water a little while, they become very soft and they constantly come off the hook, especially if you've got fish such as roach and rudd nibbling at them on the surface. So for me, I find a pop-up boardie which is a similar colour to my freebies. I trim it down with a pair of scissors to make it the shape of a dog biscuit, and I fish that on a very tight hair. So the next tip I want to mention is how you build the swim. So don't be in a hurry to cast the float straight on top of some fish. Try and get some confidence in the swim. So little and often, I'm fishing quite close in today so I can reach them with a catapult. Some occasions you might be fishing a bit further out and you'll need to spom your dog biscuits. And another tip is don't fire the bait directly on top of the fish or spom on top of the fish. Feed just away from them and use the wind to drift the floaters over the top of the carp. And once you get 1 or 2 carp competing for those dog biscuits and feeding nice and confidently, then it's time to pick the rod up and try and catch one. I've now got 1 or 2 carp feeding in the swim, so the last couple of points I want to mention, I've cast my controller float way past the feeding fish and I'm gently going to wind it into where they're feeding. Don't cast these bigger floats directly on top of the feeding carp because you're likely to spook them. And the last thing, it's quite cloudy today. If the sun does come out, in my pocket are my trusty Polaroid sunglasses. And if I pop them on in the brighter, sunnier weather, it'll take that surface glare off and I'll be able to see those feeding carp even better. This is exactly why you use a balanced setup. This nice soft, I think it's a 2-pound test curve rod, this one, and on those tiny size 10 and size 8 hooks, you can play them quite firm without the fear of snapping your hook link or pulling those tiny hooks out. So I highly recommend a lighter test curve rod for surface fishing, because if I was using something of sort of 3 1/4, 3.5 pound test curve, I'd have probably snapped the hook pulling this hard. Well, there you go, that didn't take very long at all. That was about my second cast in the swim, and the conditions aren't perfect today. It's been quite windy and quite overcast, so I'm pleased with this little fella. But if you put all those tips into practice that we've ran through, hopefully you can catch some fish off the surface yourself. So whilst it's nice and warm and the fish are in the upper layers, get your surface rod out.